All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to tackle a really fascinating puzzle, one that's right at the heart of the whole clean energy transition. I mean, it seems like a total no-brainer, right? You've got hydrogen. It's literally the most abundant thing in the universe. It burns with zero carbon. So why on earth aren't all our big trucks and ships already running on it? Well, as you're about to see, it is not a simple swap. Okay, so to really get this, we need to introduce the main character of our story. It's the compression ignition engine, or CI engine for short. Now, you almost certainly know it by its more common name, the diesel engine. And look, we're not talking about the engine in your everyday car here. No, this thing is the absolute workhorse of the global economy. It's the powerful, super reliable heart beating inside the trucks, the ships, the trains that move, well, pretty much everything you own. And that brings us to this incredible idea. You could almost call it the clean fuel dream. I mean, for decades, these engines have just been essential. We couldn't do without them. But now, with the clock ticking on climate change, we've got a massive challenge. How do we get this super important piece of tech to run clean without all the carbon? And this is where hydrogen makes its grand entrance. You know, a researcher we're looking at today, Pavlos Dimitriou, he puts it really well. He says hydrogen is seen as a truly viable energy source for the whole global economy. Think about it. It's carbon-free, it's everywhere. On paper, it looks like the absolute perfect fuel. But, and this is a huge but, if you think you can just swap out diesel for hydrogen in one of these engines and call it a day, you're in for a rude awakening. You're going to run into some major, well, let's call them engine headaches. And the first, most basic problem is a big one. You see, in a compression ignition engine, hydrogen just won't start by itself. It's a non-starter, literally. Okay, this gets right to the heart of how these engines work. A diesel engine doesn't have spark plugs, right? It just squeezes air so tight that it gets incredibly hot, and then it sprays in the fuel, which bursts into flames from the heat alone. Diesel fuel is amazing at this. It just works. But hydrogen, whew, it's a whole different story. It's super stubborn. It needs way, way higher temperatures to ignite on its own. We're talking 858 Kelvin. So under normal diesel engine conditions, nothing. It just won't light. In fact, one of the first guys who tried this, way back in 1930, apparently described the result as just disastrous. All right, so let's say you somehow figure out a way to get it started. Great. Except you immediately run smack into another wall. A serious loss of power. So what's going on here? Why the power drop? Well, hydrogen is a gas, and it's super light, which means it takes up a ton of room. So if you use a standard method called port injection, where you mix the fuel and air before they go into the cylinder, that bulky hydrogen gas just pushes out a bunch of the air. And less air means a weaker bang, which means less power. Simple as that. Now, the clever workaround is something called direct injection. This shoots the hydrogen straight into the cylinder after the air is already in there and all squeezed down. And get this, not only does that fix the power loss, it can actually give you more power than you started with. Okay, so we've got it started, we've got the power back, we're good to go, right? Nope. Now you're facing an even scarier problem. Because hydrogen is so flammable, the whole combustion process can get, well, dangerously out of control. Yeah, because hydrogen is so eager to burn, it can lead to a couple of really nasty things happening inside your engine. First, you've got knocking. That's not a gentle tap, that's an uncontrolled explosion inside the cylinder, instead of the smooth, controlled burn you want. Then there's backfire, which is just what it sounds like. The flame can actually shoot backwards out of the cylinder and into the air intake. And you don't have to be an engineer to guess that either of these can and will cause catastrophic damage to the engine. So let's say you're a genius engineer and you've solved the ignition problem, the power problem, and the control problem. You'd think you'd be home free. But there's one last problem, and this one is a real head-scratcher. It turns out this perfectly clean fuel can actually create, you guessed it, dirty emissions. Wait, how is that even possible? Well, remember, the hydrogen fuel is carbon-free. Sure, but what about the air being sucked into the engine? That air is almost 80% nitrogen. And here's the catch. When the temperature inside that cylinder gets really hot, we're talking above 1300 Kelvin, that nitrogen in the air can actually cook up with the oxygen. And what do you get? Harmful pollutants called nitrogen oxides, or NOx. And since hydrogen burns ridiculously hot, it basically creates the perfect fiery kitchen for cooking up a big batch of NOx.
So ignition problems, power loss, engine-destroying knock, and surprise pollution. With all these headaches, you might think the dream is dead. But it's not at all, because engineers, being the clever people they are, have come up with a brilliant solution, the dual-fuel engine.
And honestly, the concept is both brilliant and really elegant in its simplicity. Here's how it works. First, the engine pulls in a mix of hydrogen and air. Then, at just the right microsecond, it injects a tiny little shot of regular diesel fuel. Now, that diesel does what it always does. It ignites instantly from the heat and pressure. And that little diesel fire, that acts like the perfect pilot light, or a spark, to reliably ignite the big hydrogen-air mixture around. So you can really think of it as using a tiny, perfectly timed diesel matchstick to light the main fuel. It's so clever. This completely solves that pesky ignition problem. But it doesn't solve everything. To handle the power, stop that violent knock, and keep those NOx emissions down, engineers still need to pull out a whole toolbox of other tricks. And here's a little peek inside that toolbox. It is a constant, delicate balancing act. For example, to cool things down and reduce that NOx, they can use a trick called EGR, which pipes some of the exhaust gas back into the engine. The good news? It sloshes NOx. The bad news? It can create more soot. Or they could inject water to cool the combustion and stop that dangerous knock. But if you're not careful, that can mess with your fuel efficiency. And of course, there's always tweaking the timing of the fuel injection. But that's a classic trade-off. You can tune for more power, but you'll probably get more NOx. There is no magic bullet here. It's all about finding that perfect, delicate compromise for the job. Okay, so given all this complexity, where does this clever technology actually fit in? Where does it make sense in the real world? Is this the final answer, or is it something else? Well, the biggest thing to think about is that you have to carry two different fuels on board, hydrogen and diesel. Now, for some things, that's a total non-starter, but for others, it's a perfect fit. We're talking about the really big stuff: huge container ships, massive off-road mining trucks, or stationary generators that produce electricity. For them, adding a second fuel tank is not a big deal at all. And the payoff? Slashing their carbon emissions is absolutely massive. And that, of course, is exactly why you're not going to see this kind of engine in your Toyota Corolla anytime soon. I mean, can you imagine? The incredible complexity, the two different fuel tanks? It just makes zero sense for a regular car, where you want things to be small, simple, and efficient. But I really want to stress this point. This is not just some theory in a lab. This is happening out in the real world, right now. Just back in May 2022, a huge company, Man Energy Solutions, actually launched the very first commercial hydrogen dual-fuel engines on real working boats. This proved, without a doubt, that the technology is ready for prime time. And this really brings it all home. Back to our expert, Pavlos Dimitriou. He sums it up perfectly. He calls this an optimal medium-term solution. And that's the key phrase right there. It's not the final destination. It's not the 100% pure hydrogen future just yet. But it is an absolutely critical, practical step we can take today to start cleaning up some of the world's dirtiest, hardest-to-fix industries. So it leaves us with this final thought. You know, in the big race to get to zero emissions, we often get fixated on the giant leaps, the silver bullet solutions. But maybe, just maybe, the real unsung heroes of this story are the clever, practical, transitional technologies, like this one. The bridges that don't get all the headlines, but are the things that will actually get us to the other side. Something to think about. That's all for this explainer. Thanks for diving in with us.